Welcome into Think Deeper Podcast. Jack Wilkie here, joined by Joe Wilkie and Will Harrub as always. Almost as always. They're usually here.
Most of the time.
Getting towards the end of the year. We're very much looking forward to Christmas and the New Year holiday. But before we get to that, in fact, we're talking about doing some kind of year-end recap and episodes like that over the holidays. But we've got a bit of a full episode for you this week. Really asking the question, what is the church? You know, a few years ago, Matt Walsh had the documentary, What is a Woman? Kind of going over the controversy of transgenderism and things like that. That kind of spun off into online people kind of having the debate, what is an American, and immigration, and things like that. And so kind of in the vein of that, I wanted to have the discussion, what is the church? And that seems like a really easy answer, the people, but kind of. There's different ways we can go with that, and we're going to explore the idea here in this episode of what is the church, because it's a little more complex than we think, and how much of it is institution, how much of it is people, how much of it is I don't know. It's kind of all over the map as to how we get there, and using the Catholic Church as the extreme end, the community church as the other. We're going to explore this a little bit. So before I give away too much of the conversation, I want to see if you guys have any introductory thoughts.
Yeah, there's so much, I don't know, Church of Christ influence in even the way that I speak, the kind of the words that I choose to use surrounding this. Because like growing up, I'd have my parents would say, don't say that we're going to church. They wouldn't like get upset with me, but they would correct me from saying go to church to like we're going to go to worship service or something like that, to try to get me out of the mindset that the church is the building, right? You have things like, even I catch myself now saying things like, different congregations as opposed to different churches, right? And why is that? Well, it's because we really want to not give the impression that there are multiple churches, right? That's denominationalism, that there is one true church. It's a very Church of Christ kind of focus, right? An emphasis that we, and of course I do believe that there's one church, but the New Testament has churches in the plural, right? And so, but like my brain, I've trained myself to not say churches, I say congregations, right? And so, I guess those are the only introductory thoughts that I have, is that obviously that's just kind of like the wording and the everyday things that you, the way that you say it in everyday life. Some of the stuff we're gonna get into is obviously, a lot more gravity to it than that, but that's just kind of my introductory thoughts on kind of how this plays into the everyday life and kind of the vernacular that we use, I suppose.
Yeah. I was thinking about it from, we use this term, the church, right? And it can be it can mean so many different things to different people. Whether it is more of the corporate sense or it is more of the community, it's just a community. It's a gathering of people. You kind of have like the emergent church movement or whatever, where it's just a very free-flowing concept. Or you have, Jack, as you talked about, the high church, the Catholicism, where there's the church itself is larger than life. Like the church itself is not just the people. There's the church. The church is the one that gives the doctrine. I remember speaking with somebody who's in the Orthodox Church, and he was talking about how the church is the one that establishes authority. And so we would agree in certain areas, but not in the way that they're using the word church and the way that we might define what the church is. And so that's why I think this matters, Jack, and you bringing this up and having this, creating a great outline. It's because, we can throw these words out willy-nilly, but it is important for us to be able to define, okay, what do you mean when you say the church? Because, and I guess this just kicks us off, Jack, I'll throw it back to you. I'm curious, like, you'll hear the phrase, we don't go to church, we are the church. We are the church, which is an attempt to better understand what the church is. We'll talk to the kids about things like that. Or it's not, and I guess we can split this up, but the idea of like, it's not an organization, it's an organism. We have these different phrases or sayings that we kind of use to better understand what the concept is itself, whereas you might have like the Catholic Church that says, it's an organization, or they might not use that word, but they might treat it as such. Curious to get your thoughts on that. Specifically we are the church. We don't go to church, we are the church. What are your thoughts on that?
Are you guys familiar with the ship of Theseus illustration?
I am not. Enlightened.
Okay, so it's kind of a logic thing of you've got this ship and it comes in and it needs a board replaced, so they replace that board. Well, over time, you replace this board, this board, this board, this board, and over the course of years, every board on the ship has been replaced, and we're still calling it the ship of Theseus. It's still the same ship, but is it the same ship, right? Like all of the elements are different, but it's like, are we even looking at the same ship here? It's brand new. It's been updated, piece by piece. That kind of is similar to this idea of the church. Well, we are the church. Well, no, the church I attend existed before I got there. It, Lord willing, will exist after I've been there, after I'm dead. And the church itself, the church in general, the worldwide church, of course, exists over and above all of us. It's a thing that exists without us. And then there's also the leadership hierarchy thing. Like, there are some people who are more integral to the existence of that church. Paul in Ephesians 4 talking about some given as apostles and prophets and teachers and evangelists and shepherds and all of those roles that were given there for equipping the saints and building up the body and all of those things they're supposed to do. But it just kind of gives that question of like, well, is we are the church an accurate statement? Yes and no. And in some ways, I think in some ways it's very healthy to think that way. I think in other ways it's actually detrimental to think that way.
Jack, I guess I'm just asking you, since this was kind of your brainchild, if you have that concept of the church being the people, the answer being, from your perspective, yes and no, what's the alternative, I suppose? Like, if I don't think you're saying it's not the people. Like, obviously there is an absolute yes answer to that. And we know from Acts 2, the Lord added to the church those who are being saved, the body of Christ, Colossians 1, so many different places we could go. So I guess my question is, as we're kind of throwing this back and forth, throwing this around, is what, in addition to the body then, or in addition to the people, what would you say would be another, call it, satisfactory answer for what the church is?
It's one of those answers that it's what's the phrase? It's like, it's not more than, but it's also, or it's more than, but it's also not less than. Like, whatever your definition of the church is, it has to involve the people, right? That you can't just say, no, it's not the people. That's part of the answer for sure. But is that the entirety of it? Well, no, because again, the church is the pillar and the support of the truth. Well, are we all the pillar and the support of the truth? That you can say, well, we're supposed to. Well, that's kind of idealistic because that's not always the case. Not everyone is involved in that side of things. And so, as far as, yes, the church is the people, but it's also an institution made up of the people that, and we can do this with any group of human beings. Like, are the New York Yankees the 25 guys on the roster right now? Yeah, but also no, right? I mean, there's a logo and a stadium and jerseys, and and so in the same, America is America the 300 million Americans? Yeah, but it also no, and so there's a concept that outlives all of us that we all are buying into when we do it. And I think this is one of the problems that comes out of it, and the community church thing, the we are the church thing, is we are the church very quickly becomes I am the church. And so my preference is how I want to do it.
Individual, not collective.
And and so that, again, that's the two sides of it. Joe, you mentioned the Catholics or the Orthodox earlier. It's all collective. Like, it's all, we all lose ourselves into the mass, versus the other side of it, which is it's all a bunch of individuals coming for their own thing. And so it's got to be somewhere in the middle where it's part collective, part individual. And I think I've mentioned before the book I read recently, A Failure of Nerve on Leadership, and it's really good, but he was talking about where there's that authoritarian leadership, everybody loses. I think this is in this book, so if I'm wrong, okay, don't, sorry, I sold you guys the wrong book, but
I think it was actually in the You Are Saved book by Jack Wilkie, maybe.
Buy that one and go looking for it. Let me know if it's in there.
That's right.
When you're authoritarian, everybody loses their personality. And you kind of see this, like the North Korea, everybody dresses the same, like everybody has to be the same. But then the individualist kind of looser side of things, everybody gets to be themselves, which means you don't have a collective at all. You don't actually have an identity. You don't have a group. And so it has. And his point was, good organizations, good families, or whatever, have that mix of everybody bringing their own family, their own personality, their own idea, or their own, not ideas, but their own style into this thing that's bigger than them. Another way to put this is the phrase that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that's another way of looking at this.
Well, I was thinking about that concept of like shared culture. And you've done a lot of writing on this. You've talked about this before with America and such. And the importance of having a shared culture. That's why Eating the Turkey, you wrote that article, right? It's all on shared culture. Even Christmas, I think I saw a post of yours recently. I don't think it was, maybe it was an article, just about Christmas being more about, it's one of the last pieces of shared culture we have together as a society because we've been so fractured. I think the same thing can happen within the church, and that concept of having something in common that is different than just the immediate, that's what creates a church, is a bunch of families that obviously are in common, coming together to find something more in common. And it's that culture, it's that concept, I think is the word that you had used, that, same with the Yankees, it's tough to say it's a concept of the Yankees because it's more than just a concept, but like, who are the New York Yankees? Like, it's a belief system.
There's
everything
some
else.
tangible nature to it because they're wearing the jerseys, all that. Yeah,
right. So when you think about the church, what is the glue here? What is that concept? What is the thing that really kind of binds everything together? And we could say it's getting doctrine right, but maybe this is why we can be so fractured, is that would then assume we all have to agree on exactly what doctrine is. And I think why we're such a big believer in really going back to Romans 14 and trying to say unity is really important, but what are we unifying around? And so we're always going to come back around to the question of, in my opinion, of what is salvation and what's not. That's going to be a key question in terms of establishing a shared culture, a shared identity, a shared concept that's bigger as part of what is the church. Will?
I want to dig into that thing, or that phrase that you used earlier, Joe, to kind of, as you kind of introduced it within this discussion. The church is not an organization, it's an organism, is what people will say. I don't think it, just going off of Google definitions is always the best way to go about things. But if you just look up the definition of the word, so the AI, of course, like the first thing that pops up every time you Google definition of something, just says an organization is fundamentally a structured group of people working together with a shared purpose, using coordinated activities, roles, and systems to achieve common goals. Oxford, an organized body of people with a particular purpose, especially a business, society, or association. I think the reason people try to stay away from that idea of the church being an organization is due to like the kind of the business the corporate connotations that comes along with it. But just kind of by definition, I would say the church absolutely is an organization, and this is where what it reminds me of. You guys remember I don't remember. I know we did a gym podcast on. I don't think we did a Think Deeper episode on the Pete Hegseth speech from 2 months ago now.
Yeah, you guys did a gym, and I did a cultural breakdown. So we all talked about it just in different ways.
There you go. So I actually played 3 minutes of that video for our leadership meeting at Chick-fil-A earlier this week. And the part that I highlighted was the part where Hegseth essentially was saying standards have to be maintained at a high level. Otherwise, they're not standards. They're just suggestions. Well, how can the church do that if you don't look at the church as somewhat of an organization, right? That's where the leadership structure comes in. That's where the hierarchy structure comes in. To y'all's point about the individualism versus the collectivism, if it's just a bunch of individuals kind of, not doing their own thing, but, there's not more to it than just a bunch of individuals, it is a whole lot harder to enforce those standards. Those standards do turn into suggestions a whole lot more. And unfortunately, that is what you see in a lot of congregations, is not a ton of standards, right? And so I'm curious y'all's thoughts on, I guess I'm saying all that to say, I don't know that I agree with that phrase that the church is not an organization, but rather it's an organism, because within an organization, again, just the definition, group of people working together for a certain purpose, typically there's going to be standards, there's going to be leadership structures. I don't know. It kind of all adds up to me there. What thoughts do you guys have on that concept?
Yeah, I mean, as the church reset guy, that I was very big on church is not a business, and I don't believe it is a business, but it is an institution in the same sense that the family is an institution. And with an institution comes
no doubt
identity, comes hierarchy, comes structure, comes processes and things like that. And so, I mean, at the heart of this, where we say that the church is something bigger than just the people as part of it, that starts with Christ the head, right? That this is all flowing from him, and he also administers it through the apostles, and again, as I quoted in Ephesians 4, the people he set up to give us that and maintain that and establish that. And I talk so much because I think it's such an important word that Paul talks about entrusting it, that Paul was entrusted and Timothy was entrusted and Titus was entrusted and the elders are entrusted. Not everyone's entrusted. And so there's that structure there that, if everybody in the church can leave, but the elders are still entrusted to do this stuff and hold this stuff up, or everyone in the church can want something, but they're not the ones entrusted with it. And so it's not a democracy. It's not all of us. And so this is the stuff. We've mentioned the Orthodox and Catholics a couple times. where they're really one of their things that they're really trading on and working on is kind of telling people, hey, the church is the authority. The church is why you have the Bible that you have. The church is, and I think they badly overstate that because they don't acknowledge the disagreements in what, church leadership has been. But basically, the guys that, the earliest Christians are more authoritative than us, and the heads, the priests, whatever, the Pope in the Catholic Church are more authoritative than us right now. Well, no, I think that takes it too far. But on the other hand, I think most, especially popular Christianity, has gone too far in the other direction. One of those classic overcorrections of basically, you notice a lot of these community churches don't even have a doctrinal page. And they say, well, we're non-denominational. Usually they're pretty Baptisty, but it's just whatever we want to be. Whatever's going to get people in the door, whatever kind of churchianity we want to preach. And so that's what you end up with. And so so you got nothing over here, and you've got, again, those two sides of this that get, I think, overdo it. And so in the middle, you've got to have the right thing, which is Christ through the elders and the preachers administering the church that we have today. That's what the church is. And if it doesn't go up to the top like that, it's not the church.
Here's where this gets sticky is you think about this on a mass concept, going like global. We'll talk about, there are members of the church that are worshiping in India, worshiping in China, worshiping in wherever it may be, and in the U.S., around the world, and so it's just this amazing thing. But this is what's difficult is, in the just town of Nashville alone, there are going to be dozens of Church of Christ. There's going to be a lot of people that have Church of Christ on the door that just aren't going to be that. I guess to use names, Otter Creek is now Otter Creek Church. It was Otter Creek Church of Christ for a long time while it was still doing things that we would not hold to within the church, and then we certainly wouldn't fellowship. That's what makes it difficult when we talk about the church. It goes back to, okay, how do we define the church on a global level? Because that's what Catholicism's trying to do, is take everybody around the world, 1.5 or whatever it is billion Catholics, and incorporate a concept of the church in general. We have the church being, we'd say the Church of Christ, but even within the Church of Christ, we have people that wouldn't say are necessarily part of the church. And I think that's what makes this a difficult yet intriguing question for us is how do we define some of those things? And the other piece that comes out of this, and Will, it goes to your point on organization. When you were talking about that, I had this concept of a adult softball team or something along those lines that doesn't take itself too seriously. Yeah, we're all in it together. We come together. We have a shared common interest in playing softball. We'll get there. Maybe maybe things go well. Maybe they don't. Versus a travel AAA team or whatever it is that, kids that are kind of coming up or the pros. They have a set goal, a set purpose. We're already talking about the Yankees, so we'll go back to a sports league, an adult league that's just kind of a rec league, whatever you want to call it, yeah. But, the adult league stuff. They're still playing the same game, but they're not organized in the same way. It's like juniors, you know what I mean? And I feel like the church so often can kind of view that where we all come together, yeah, we're all worshiping God, but the purpose itself is not moving in the same.
To it.
Correct. There's a casualness, and they're not moving in the same direction like the purpose itself. Whereas you look at a team that is in each other's homes all the time, they're doing everything. We used to play travel hockey, and you'd see these teams that come in and smoke everybody. It's they're playing together all the time. They're best buds. They're doing things all the time. That is a big struggle for the average Church of Christ or for the average church to be able to recreate that. Jack, you talked about this in Church Reset, to create that connection, the hospitality, the having this closeness with one another. That's what really good travel teams do. That's what the teams that go out and beat everybody is. They have a shared common interest, yes, in baseball, but it's so much more than just getting together in a rec league and playing some baseball. And I feel like most of the churches, when we talk about what is the church, it's it's my rec baseball team. Not we got to go out and do big things for Christ and have this really strong purpose and this set of values that is going to dictate what the church looks like. And then how do we share that with everybody else? Because we may be all about it. We may be the travel team, quote unquote, that's in each other's homes doing everything else. Throw a rock down here and hit another Church of Christ, and they're nothing like that. And yet we're all the church collectively, but the way we approach the church, the way we approach the concepts within the church are wildly different. That's, again, what to me makes so much of this a difficult concept when we go to define the church. And if we're too dogmatic about it, and if I then start condemning the brethren that aren't taking it as seriously, then I quickly become the Pharisees, and I back my way out of what I believe is the true church at some point. So,
well, I guess just to narrow, I'll just say this briefly to narrow our focus. I think it's better to keep it to the local church, like what we think the local church should be when we say what is the church, because there is the church worldwide. But and so the local church, we can say it should be this way, and the one down the street's not. Well, that's kind of the point of Jesus administered this through the elders. So I mean, you can only do it in a local church, and we think every local church should act a certain way. We can't make them, but like the ideal for the local church. So when we say what is the church, or when somebody says what is church, well, it's not the building and it's not the worship time on Sunday, but what is it? And so that's I say just keep it to the local church is a good way to kind of keep us on track. But Will, what'd you have there? In depth but easy to understand. That's how War in Heaven, War on Earth, what the book of Revelation meant to the original readers and what it means for us today, has been described. An Amazon reviewer said it was the best commentary on Revelation he had read in 50 years. Bradley Cobb spent literally thousands of hours researching and putting together this material, showing how first-century Christians, the ones the book was written to, would have understood the book, how it matches with the rest of the Bible, and how it was something that was about to happen when John wrote it. Thoroughly biblical in his approach, including the dating of the book, and supported with first-century history, this 550-page book does not gloss over any details and includes points of application throughout each of the book's 48 studies. Great for personal study or for a year-long Bible class. Available on Amazon.com in hardcover, paperback, or Kindle.
Yeah, so I turned to Ephesians 5, obviously, because there's so much there that discusses or that describes the church, because I was looking up just search on logos, church, right, or churches, and not a ton of places where it gets necessarily defined, right? You see, obviously there's a ton of revelation to the angel of the church, write this, and there's a ton in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians of just the English word church. I didn't look up into the Greek or anything like that, but so a ton. So Ephesians 5 is where my mind went to. Obviously, wives, submit to your own husbands. Verse 23, the husband's head of the wife is also Christ, head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. I never thought about that before, the idea that, those two things are kind of separated there. But then verse 25, of course, husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her, the church, with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her, the church, to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she, the church, should be holy and without blemish. I don't know. I'd never really thought about it much in the light of kind of this discussion, but to me, that is more of an insight into what the church is in the New Testament than many other again, like you go to Acts 2, but the Lord added to the church daily, and so that does to me present the idea that it is kind of the body of people. But then I also, again, I go back to that organization word that people kind of have a problem with. What I'm reading in Ephesians 5 is, as I'm reading about Christ giving himself up for the church, might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having any spot or wrinkle. Yes, it's the people, but it's people that are united towards a common purpose to serve God and to seek after Christ and to go that direction. And I'm sure there's people listening to us thinking they're kind of splitting hairs here. I don't think we think about that. I don't think we process that it's not just the people that assemble on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock to hear the sermon and then are out the door. It's a group. I mean, again, verse 27, present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that they should be holy without blemish. This is a group of people, yes, but a group of people that are striving after pursuing Christ and being like Christ and pursuing not just heaven with God, but pursuing a relationship with God. I don't know. That to me, there's a lot more gravity to it than just, oh yeah, church is the people. Church is people. Like, sure, but you got to get more specific than that. So that's kind of where my mind went as we're having this discussion.
Yeah, and I want to give credit to the we are the church thing. I noted a couple things on the outline of good qualities from that, and it's telling people kind of the God has no hands but our hands kind of thing. Like, we've got to do these things. And so usually when people say that, it's a good thing. And I agree with what they mean by saying it, of, okay, we have to evangelize. We have to go and serve and do those things that we're supposed to do, and that we're salt and light. And yeah, that like because there's also the if not us, then who? It's not, that's the preacher's job. It's all of our jobs. And so all of that is really good, but we are in this time where there's a lot of individualism among the members. And very much a customer is always right mentality, very much church is what I want it to be. I'll give you what I want. I'll follow when I want to follow. I won't if I don't. I just heard a story from an elder the other day of this member just running her own program, just kind of telling, well, you guys are doing that. You decided this. I'm going to go do this other thing, and I'm going to get some of the people here to go do that with me, and not even leaving, just within the church. All right, well, you guys go do that over there, and we'll go do this over here. That, and that is kind of and I'm not saying that the we are the church mentality is synonymous with that or leads to that, but it's also hey, you don't get to do that. Just because you are the church or you're part of the church or whatever doesn't make it your church. My kids are part of the family. They don't make any big decisions, right? And so when we think of ourselves as church members, this is all a very kind of philosophical question and discussion about the church, and so hopefully we're not really losing people by getting into the weeds here, but I think what Will brings up there in Ephesians 5 is important of there is something here, and there's expectations for what is here, and I referenced it earlier in passing, but I want to quote it, is in 1 Timothy 3:15, Paul gives the reason for writing 1 Timothy. He says, "In case I'm delayed, I write so that you will know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and support of the truth." So you have a few things there. The church is the household of God. So again, just very parallel to a home. But then he says the pillar and support of the truth. Again, it's important for all of us to desire the truth, but certain people are entrusted with that truth, and it's up to us to submit to that truth. If you're not one of those people that's entrusted with it, especially, submission is a really big part of being part of the church. And I guess maybe more than anything is what I'm getting at here is submission to something bigger than yourself has to be part of your engagement with the church, your understanding of the church.
I think that's why, maybe this is my, me just going back to the why, as per usual. That's why the purpose point really stands out in my mind is, the thing that gets individuals working together is that they have a shared common purpose. When you think about the body, you think about the family, you think about marriage, all three of those are concepts used to describe the church. Well, with each one of those concepts, you have to have an understanding of you have to have a why, you have to have a purpose of where you're moving. It's not just two people coming to live together to cohabitate and see how it goes. There's a purpose for marriage, a divine purpose. Same thing with the family, is there is a purpose to the family. And when you see the homes that don't really have an understanding of where they're going or what they're all about, and it is kind of a collection of individuals, it's a really sad concept because it's like every man for himself mentality. Everybody's in it to get what they want out of it, and the family serves the function of just trying to keep the individuals happy, not the other way around. But most of the time it's because the family has lost the plot. They've lost the idea of what they're even attempting to do. When you see this happen in church, and as you guys are talking about the individualism that really sets in, that to me is the biggest struggle in an organization. Is in order for me to have a buy-in, I may not be part of the hierarchy structure. I still have to have a buy-in. It's what every joint supplies. Everybody's important, but how do I know that I'm important? Because the church has a mission, and I get to help be a part of that mission. If the church's mission is to show up on Sundays and just try to basically pay the bills and keep the lights on, that's not much of a mission for people to get behind. And I think the church as a structure, as an organization, or whatever we want to say, even as a family, becomes an every man for himself mentality. It is there to serve me and to make me feel close to God, rather than having a concept of where we're going that I can plug into and be a part of something bigger than myself. I get to be a part of the church rather than the church is just serving my needs because that's my goal is to get to heaven. There's a bigger concept they're missing, which is the purpose of the church, I think.
Sure. You know what evidence that is out there for this is how, or just a piece of evidence, I suppose, is how little our young people stay faithful. They grow up in the church, but they don't view themselves as part of the church. And I think that's why it's so easy for them to just up and leave, right? Go off to college and, start maybe sleeping in on Sunday mornings, right? And going twice a month, and that twice a month turns into once a month. And then they, eventually just either become very casual, spotty attenders, or they leave the church altogether. And And so to me, that's evidence of this idea that at least young people, and so odds are probably a lot of older people as well, don't truly grasp what being a member of the church is all about. In fact, if you were to ask young people, take your average 17-year-old about to graduate high school who goes to church, been going to church their whole life. If you were to ask them like, hey, list out the parts of your life that you feel like you belong, like that you are a part of a group, right? How far down does the church hit their list, right? How far down does the being a part of a group of people that are pursuing Christ and some of the things that I was talking about earlier, how far down does that hit their list, right? They're going to mention their school, their sports team, their extracurricular activities, their friend group, whatever it is, maybe their family. Church will be somewhere 5th or 6th on the list. And so to me, that's kind of evidence of maybe why just telling kids that the church is the people is not wrong, but is just incomplete, maybe to some of the things Jack was talking about earlier in the episode. Yeah, just like it doesn't stick. There's no buy-in with a lot of young people, and so that's why it's so easy for them to leave.
Good point. Yeah, I want to get to some of the specifics here in a minute, but to wrap kind of this part of it, it's kind of the adapted JFK quote of ask not what your church can do for you, ask what you can do for your church. And yeah, your church is going to do some things for you, but you have to have the attitude to serve. Mark 10:45, Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. And we've got to do the exact same thing in our connection with the church. And the funny thing is, we talked about the community church thing and kind of the very, everybody come in exactly as you are and will do for you kind of thing. But then the Catholic Church with the whole the church is kind of king thing, the institutionalization, they both end up in the same place. It's weird how, two sides of the pendulum can get it wrong in the same ways, in that the Catholics, it's like, we'll do it for you. We got the priests, we got the Pope, we'll handle it. You're not qualified to handle it, we'll handle it. The big box church thing is very much, we'll handle it. We'll put things on that you like. You show up. We'll put on game day and game nights for you. We'll have a bouncy castle for your kids. We'll do it for you kind of thing. And it's kind of like gentle parenting versus really super strict authoritarian parenting. The gentle parenting is, I'll let my kid just go and destroy the house, and I'll just come up after them and clean it up and just let them do whatever they want. They just get to do whatever they want because it's about them. On the other hand, I don't want my kid to mess anything up in my house, so I'm not, in the end, the parent just ends up doing all the work either way. That's not how it's supposed to be. So yeah, the church does require the involvement of the people, but that can only be done through the right structure of very clear, specific authority equipping people, as Ephesians 4 talks about. You've got to have these guys here. They've got to equip the people. And sometimes you've got church leadership that's wanting to do the right thing, and the people aren't interested, very lazy, very much, I want to get what church, church needs to serve me. And then sometimes you've got church people who want to do stuff, but they're not submitting to the leadership and where the leadership wants to go, or the leadership's not leading them. And so you end up in this mess. And these are the kind of people we hear from sometimes. They're just very frustrated with their church leadership. Like, well, they're not leading us. They're not helping us do things. They're not directing these efforts. And, you got to get both of these elements right, I guess is what we're getting at here to have the full picture of what church is supposed to be. So, like I said, I want to get to the specifics, Joe, but you have something on that?
No, I was just going to say that. That's why I was hitting on the purpose so much, is like, and why I think I'm a fan, I know this is left field, but why I'm a fan of this concept of Christ ruling the nations, Christian nationalism a little bit, is it gives us a purpose for, there's a reason we go out and do these things. And yeah, we want to get people to heaven, no doubt. I think that's a great goal. But there's a reason why we go out and try to be the best Christians we can be, and to be loud about our faith, and to live it out, and to vote in a very positive way that is going to lead toward the spread of Christianity, because there is a goal at stake when we're not buying into the concept of what church is, and it kind of lives to serve me. It's like, there's something much greater here. There's a bigger thing. And the more that we talk about multi-generational faithfulness, the more we talk about, this grand concept of the family and the grand concept of passing down through the generations, you start to think, again, generationally, the link in the chain, we've used that concept before. The church as a whole and throughout time, like, we get to play an important part. But if we lose that, if we make it more about the individual, I feel like we break that link in the chain. The next generation has to pick it up. I think that's what we're seeing here, where the church has just become more about how it serves us. Gen Z and the following generations are going to have to kind of pick that up and redefine let's go back to what the church is intended to be, which is again what we're trying to discuss here. Will?
Well, like your church is an outpost on the battlefield of a global invasion kind of thing, rather than it's just there. Yeah.
It's just there. Yeah, it just exists. Like, why does it exist, and why is it important to exist and to maintain its place in every single community? There's that post going back a little while back of like, well, isn't it great that, a church just sold its building and gave to the poor and they built low-income housing there? It's like, no, it needs to be a light in the community. The church needs to be there because the church is not just a concept, it's something more, and that's where the church building comes in. And like, it needs to be an integral part of each community and see itself as something bigger than just, well, we're here. We show up on Sundays and Wednesdays and just kind of worship God. Like, don't lose the plot of what the church is intended to be. And not just, I know the purpose and what it is are two different things, but I do think they go hand in hand, that you can't understand who you are until you know what you're supposed to do, if that makes sense. But yeah, I agree with you. We can get into the practical. Will?
Well, Jack, I know you really want to get there. I had a question that...
Keep it rolling. We're fine.
Is just kind of tied to this in my brain. You guys might hear this and be like, that's not tied to it at all. So you kind of have that, there's that idea, right, that the church is only the people. And so I'm curious from y'all's perspective, because Jack, for instance, I know you in particular, Joe, I think you agree with him, would warn against certainly really big churches, right, as far as high member count, north of 300-400 people. Like, that's a lot, right? You've talked about that before. On the other hand, both of you guys have also, I don't remember if Jack was moved out yet or not, but y'all did like a home church type of thing, right? With like kind of one other family. Theoretically, under the church is only the people, that's really kind of all that matters. That should be just as, I don't want to say just as good, just as valuable, just as legitimate, maybe is the word I would use. I'm curious if that, as I bring that kind of concept of a home church, like let's say me and another family decide like, hey, this is what we want to do, family in Iowa or something, there's nobody around. Like, how much does that play into this discussion of maybe you do need a little bit more than just, one or two families coming together? Like, I'm just curious. I guess I'm just asking if y'all's experience with trying the home church thing 15 years ago or whatever it was colors this discussion at all and adds a little bit of light to maybe it is a little bit more than just a group of people getting together to have the Lord's Supper. You know what I mean?
Right. It's interesting. There's some guys that are really trying to push the return to home church thing, and that's how it was meant to be. That's how the first century church did it. And that kind of leaves the question of like, were we always supposed to do that, or were they working towards something bigger? And I think they were working towards something bigger, that it could become more of an institution with staying power.
That wasn't
not
the destination, essentially.
Yeah, not that it was going all the way up to the Vatican and the Pope and all that. Like, I think that's an overextension of it. But on the other hand, that we were only ever to meet with in homes with a few people. I don't get that, and I think that's one of those things. The fruit of home church movements is usually they start out pretty good. They can even grow pretty fast, pretty quick, and then they just run into a dead end. Like, how many houses are you going to get? It doesn't always go that well. Because the formality that that was the fledgling church. That was the church in its infancy, the church learning to walk. Well, when you're learning to walk, you do things different than when you're 25 years old, and so what was the mature church supposed to look like? And was it wrong for the church to move into a building eventually? Was it wrong to, home churches can have elders, they can have, structure, things like that, but I think... And so it's not so much about the building as much as the attitude behind it. Like you say, it's not just, well, I love Jesus and you love Jesus, so let's get together and worship him together. Like, that again is one of those extreme ends of this "we are the church" thing. Is, well, that's all it takes. No, it does take something more. So that's a really interesting. It's a great question. It really is.
I don't know that I have the answer, specifically. There's those that are going to rip out the, where two or three are gathered in my name.
Matthew
I'm right
18.
there with them. Matthew 18, right, ripping out of context. Sorry, go for it.
I was just say poorly misused or very badly misused. Yeah.
Very poorly, very, very misused. But some people will point to that and say, well, God is present. And do I think that God could bless a church theoretically like that? Yeah, no doubt. But I think Jack's right. Now, what that missing, the secret sauce is, or what, like, when does because it just breaks. And again, this is why. Thank you guys for sticking with us if you're this far. This is more kind of as you said, Jack, a theoretical, maybe a little scattered on this, but it's like, at what point does a home church become a legitimate church? Is it when they move out of the homes and into a building? What if they had more people at the home than they had at the building? But now at the building, they have a little more legitimacy because they're there, and maybe they buy the nice communion trays. And so, at what point, and now we're back to the ship analogy of like, okay, what plank was the time where it's now become, and I know that's kind of badly misusing the illustration, but like, what plank was the time where it finally became a church? Like, we had this concept of a church, and then somewhere along the way, it became something different or it became something legitimate. What the crossover line is really tough to know, in my opinion. It's more of I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know if that's because I think you could have a home church where you have 25 members that show up. They take things very, very seriously. Maybe they are in they're in the path of trying to grow. They're in the path of maybe trying to become, get their own place and hopefully grow to a much bigger congregation, but they have 25 dedicated Christians. Who would I be to say that's not a legitimate church? On the other hand, okay, let's dwindle that number down to 12 and they meet in the same church. Okay, well, there's plenty of congregations in Tennessee here that do have 12 on a Sunday morning, but they're in a bigger building. They just dwindled down. Are they any more legitimate than the 12 that... Back around to theoretical concepts that I don't know that we have the answer for, but it's almost more, and as goofy as this sounds, it's almost more of a feeling of, are we taking ourselves seriously, and do we have, once again, kind of a mission as to what we're trying to do with this church? Because if it's just us getting together and trying to avoid all the other problems of the other churches, that to me is very wrong. Starting the other church to do that, and looking back at our time, we thought we'd have more families. We had a couple of visitors back at that time, and so that's not to justify or anything else. But I think there was a level of, taking a break from some church hurt for a second and trying to see what would come of it, of having some dedicated Christians, and travel schedules and things like that caused it to be illegitimate in a way. And so, it's that type of thing. Like, if one family having a travel schedule crumbles the church, then how legitimate is the church?
Right. Fair enough. So the part I want to get into here before we wrap is... when things go wrong at a church, whether it's in the leadership or whether it's in the membership, that's when the practical, that's when we get into the specifics of like, that's where it starts kind of pressing this whole we are the church thing. Well, like, which of us? Are they not the church? Are we the church or whatever? And so I don't know which side you guys want to look at first, of kind of the members doing their own thing, kind of calling their own shots, insubordination, or the church leadership going astray, starting to teach things that are wrong, starting to allow sin, tolerate things, whatever that maybe the case may be. Which one do we want to talk about first?
Well, I think the tougher one is when church leadership and basically an entire congregation seems to be kind of floating off the deep end, essentially. Because to me, the answer for an individual doing that, I say it's simple. I don't mean that it's simple to handle. I just mean the solution should be fairly simple, which is church leadership steps up and says, basically, get back in line. Like, you do not run the show. When church leadership, though, and this kind of expands into a much bigger concept of church fellowship. Like, obviously, we were talking before we got on about non-institutional, for instance. There are some non-institutional congregations that have no problem, kind of fellowshipping other congregations that are not non-institutional, and there are others that do not. And so, what should we consider them? What should they consider us? You've got a congregation that maybe has a female youth intern. I don't think any of us would be comfortable. Let's say she does. I had this in Alabama. I know I talked about before, a congregation that was close to where I was working. Female youth intern, didn't speak in front of the boys, didn't do anything like that. But I'm certainly not comfortable with that, right? I don't think either one of you guys either. Stuff like that. To me, that's the more interesting discussion, is what to do when the leadership, the elders, a whole congregation starts to kind of, again, drift off the deep end. So, that's really tough. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, that gets to the when to leave a church and all that, and what I guess the question that, in keeping in line with what we were talking about, is what is the church, of what does that make the church? Let's say the First Avenue Church of Christ, to use just the standard Church of Christ illustration. For the First Avenue Church of Christ, there's a piano on stage. The First Avenue Church of Christ has a woman get up in the pulpit or whatever. This hypothetical church does that. Are they in the church anymore? And you get into the lampstand discussion in Revelation 2 and 3 of it's going to be taken away, and that they tolerated false teachers, they tolerated the woman Jezebel, the Nicolaitans, those different in different cases, but like, hey, you're letting this stuff in through the cracks, and it's causing you these problems, and you're going to lose your lampstand. And so I guess that means, like, but did that church probably kept meeting even if they lost their lampstand? They thought they were a church. They're not a church. Are they the church?
Or the church at Corinth that had all kind of things wrong with them.
Right. And so when do you leave that church? And, because there has to be a point at which it's okay for you to leave the church, and you still are part of Christ's church, even though you left that church and you're not part of that church. But again, there's that other side of it of like, well, I disagree with these guys, therefore I'm out on one thing, therefore I'm out the door. It's a difficult spectrum. That's one of the questions we get probably more than most is, when do you actually leave a church? That's a really hard one.
That's a really hard question, because for me, both of those might be. I don't think it's.
There's also the matter of trajectory that we
Right.
is really important. There's no church that like wakes up one morning and is like, all right, we're gonna have Susie preach this week. That doesn't happen. They have
It's
deaconesses.
gradual
They
change,
let her co-teach a class, whatever. Yeah.
Well, there's always, we talked about it before, but one of the congregations that we attended when I was very young and left around 2 years old was because there was just that. The elders literally said, we're looking to push the envelope. And within a few years of us leaving, they had turned into a community church and just took Church of Christ off the door. And you could see that, exactly to your point, like this gradual creep of, why would you mic women in the audience? You don't need to. And, well, they're not leading. We just mic them because the music sounds better. And then, you just kind of go to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And is it enough to mic a woman and then leave over that? I don't know. At some point, yes, the conscience has to be pricked to say, okay, I'm not okay with that. I wasn't okay with number one. There's 7 things in. How bad does it have to get? I think if you're discussing with the leadership, and the leadership has really shown that their bent or their trajectory is outside the bounds, like it's going off. Yeah, I think that's where you do have to say, trajectory-wise, I am looking to leave. And on the first one, if you call that out and they say something, which they literally told my parents were pushing the envelope, not a good thing. That's not what we're looking to do. And so when my parents left, I think they're fully justified in that. If the elders had said, I see where you're coming from, I see why this is a struggle, we're doing this because of XYZ, they can point to biblical reasons, which I don't think in that situation they can. But even if they give a halfway decent reason, you say, okay, and that's all it ever stays, then you have to decide, it's against my conscience. I don't necessarily know that I'd condemn them, for miking people in the audience, some of which have to be women. I certainly am not comfortable with that. But that's a different concept than, yeah, the trajectory is really, really off. So from a leadership standpoint, and Jack, to your point, when did they stop being the church? Was it somewhere along that spectrum where they have the lampstand removed, or where the concept of the church is now twisted and morphed into something that I don't think that it actually is? Once again, we're asking a lot more questions than we're answering, but this goes to show the struggle, the nature of the struggle, to say definitively this is what it is.
Jack, you've got on there and I know you briefly mentioned it, but the Revelation chapters 2 and 3 about the churches, the 7 churches that are written to. I find it so fascinating that, he says the angel of the church, so that he's still acknowledging these places or these groups of people, buildings, congregations, whatever, as the church. But what does he tell most of them? What's the word he uses? Repent. And he says, repent, or else I will, you'll have your lampstand removed. And so what you see in those 2 chapters is the church. He still calls it the church. It's not like, well, they're just completely off now. But they do have, and maybe this is kind of what I was getting at earlier with 1 Corinthians, with the church in Corinth, they had some margin, and then once they were warned about that and kind of told about it, then they had runway to either repent or continue down and have their lampstand removed. And so, I don't know. To me, I feel like that very much could still apply. I mean, he says it to Pergamos, he says it to Ephesus, like, of course, Thyatira, like that that they need to repent as a church. But I do find it interesting that label of church was not removed before they repented. Does that make sense? Like, again, there's like some runway there. So I don't know you're the one that put it on the outline, Jack, but what thoughts did you have about those examples of the churches, Laodicea as well, of course?
Yeah, there's definitely that warning. The thing that's interesting to me is that angel it's translated sometimes in the New Testament as messenger. Sometimes it's an angel, sometimes it's like John the Baptist was called an angelos, like they're the same word. And so it could be a human. It might be to the preacher. It might be to, that person. And Also interesting is with Ephesus, you lost your first love. That's singular. That's you, not y'all. That's you, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, depending if you take that meaning to be that way, which is debatable once again, and if you take Revelation to be the early date, which is once again debatable, that means he's writing to Timothy at the same time Paul is writing to Timothy to say, hey, get your act together. And so it's very much the point I'm making at here is like this could be through the leadership. Like, hey, this church is going to lose its lampstand because of you. And so this is the thing I think that I kind of, as we start to wrap and button this whole thing up, is I don't think we realize how much the church is defined by its leadership. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, it's the people, but it's also heavily dependent on who's doing the preaching and teaching, who's doing the shepherding, who's doing those roles. That's who God interfaces with in this. And so one of the things I've gotten crazy pushback on, obviously, and I think we talked about it on an episode at some point about the closed communion of the church, just saying, hey, this is for the members, but also like as part of church discipline, saying you don't get to take the Lord's Supper anymore. You don't get to do that. And man, people are very uncomfortable with that. People really don't like that idea because, well, that's between me and God. No, the church serves the Lord's Supper. You don't get to take your cracker and juice up on your hike with you and have it by yourself. You don't get to, like, this is administered by the church. And again, the Catholics have the guy break it and put it in your mouth for you. I'm not all the way up there, but on the other hand, it's also not between you and God. It's absolutely not between you and God, and I think that's what we've gotten to with this. I am the church. I come to God, and the church kind of helps me with my relationship with God. But like, no, the church is the administration of God. I don't know. It's on things like that where you really see the split in people's minds between what the church is and what they think the church is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think the same thing like a father with setting the tone in the home. We talk about the father being the culture setter. Like, it's the leadership in the home that defines the family, that defines what that is supposed to look like, what the family's all about, what do we do here, and what are the rules and everything else. And so the concept of a kid getting to define the family itself, because the kid goes, well, I'm just not going to do that. Like, that's not what we do here. And having a strong leadership presence within the church and being able to point back to that, I think you're exactly it, Jack. And this goes to show, we don't have all the answers. We've asked a lot of questions, probably left some open-ended that make sure to comment and get your thoughts in. But
one other thing to kind of follow up on what you're saying there, the thing about the angels is they're going to answer for it and not you. And appreciate that, right? Appreciate that your preacher, your elders are going to answer for things that you're not going to. And so doing that, well, I'm just right there next to you. You're not, actually. And that's not a good way to approach your relationship with the church.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm just saying, we may not have all the answers, but this is why it's important, is because these concepts are on the line. The concept of, hey, do we administer the Lord's Supper to somebody who's clearly in sin, or somebody who is, like you said, on their hike alone? Like, these are real world problems that are solved when we understand what the church is, and that the church is more important than just the people, just the individual putting time and effort into it. So it is, I'm glad you put the outline together, Jack, and brought this up, because again, maybe a little scattered and maybe, maybe a little tangential in some ways, but by and large, I think it's very relevant. And it's going to be a question that's going to come up a lot more, especially in future generations, as we really do try to get back to, okay, it's not just the seeker sensitive, we're really trying to get to the individual, and it's all about catering to them. People are rebelling against it. That's why we're seeing Catholicism, Orthodoxy, Anglicanism in bigger numbers. They're adding in droves because people are looking for the authority that the church provides. We got to make sure we're bringing that in and allowing for the church to be the church and not just whatever whim the average member wants it to be. Will, any other closing thoughts before we get to Think Fast?
Only thing that I'll wrap up with is the leadership point is fantastic. I mean, even just mentally for me, when I hear somebody say, yeah, the church is the people, I'm not thinking the leadership. I'm thinking the members. And so like that's a very important distinction to make, that no, because you think about any, to use the word again, organization, any group of people, they're defined by their leaders. Absolutely. The culture is defined by them. The standards that I brought up earlier is defined by the leaders. And so we can say the church is the people all we want. And it is, of course. The leadership has so much sway over what the church culture looks like. Staple point of our podcast. Don't need to rehash it. But so, yeah, that was a really good point. That's pretty much all that I had to wrap up with.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys kind of indulging this. This is the kind of discussion I sit and think about all the time. And so it's kind of fun to just riff on it and see what you guys thought and kind of formulate some of this. I hope this was of interest to the listeners, as always, get your comments in on Focus Plus for the deep end, but also YouTube, Facebook, shoot us a message, wherever you'd like to reach out. Hey guys, Jack here. I'm excited to tell you about my new book, You Are Saved, The Christian's Assurance. For too many years, I have run into Christians who aren't really sure where they're going to go when they die. They don't feel like they can say that they are righteous, and so I set out to write a book to give you confidence and assurance of your salvation. It's laid out in 13 chapters for churches to study as a Bible class with discussion questions at the end of each chapter. And, of course, you can just read it on your own either. It's for individuals, it's for classes, however you would like to approach it. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Focus Press. We offer discounts for group sales of it in groups of 5 and 10 on Focus Press. So if you're going to study it with your church, be sure to check that out and get that deal. So be sure to check out You Are Saved today, once again on Amazon and Focus Press. All right, we've got a Christmas-themed Think Fast. Think Deeper is the whole podcast. Think Fast is this brief little snippet here at the end on the question of Santa Claus. And I know this has long been a question. I think we've discussed it before, like what are you going to do with your kids with Santa Claus? For whatever reason, this year, it is a really hot topic with a lot of people, a lot of Christians
It's
saying,
big on X right now.
Yeah, and I've seen their Substack. It's going around. I've seen a couple things on Facebook. I think Texas Monthly, when I Googled it, there was an article. In The Atlantic, there was an article. Like all these magazines and publications, is it a lie to play Santa with your kids? Is it a lie to say, well, Santa's coming, he's going to leave you presents, all that stuff? Is it wrong to do that for your kids? I thought, well, there's pros and cons of doing it, not doing it, and with us, we kind of let the kids know pretty early on. Yeah, it's not 100%.
I was going to say, Jack, you guys are not doing Santa Claus, right?
Yeah, I mean, but they're still kind of into it, so they talk about Santa, even though it kind of comes back around to, yeah, there's not actually a guy Santa, but you're going to get presents, and it's part of the spirit of this whole thing. Right? Yeah. And so it's kind of a hybrid thing, and I think some people do that, but no, there's some people very much out saying it is a sin to tell your kids that Santa Claus is going to give them presents. So what do you guys think about that?
Will?
I got a lot of thoughts. Let me start with I understand the concern. I understand the premise of, let's say a kid finds out at 9 years old that Santa Claus is not real. Well, that was 9 years that they believed something that wasn't true. You as their parents, again, I can understand people that say this. You as the parents kind of perpetuated that, therefore you are guilty of lying to them. My short and not very well worded take is that people just need to get a grip. Like it's really not that serious. My longer take. So let me address first that there are people who will try to say that you are going to lead your kids to question belief in God if you do Santa Claus. I've heard that from quite a few people. Like you'll teach them, you'll tell them Santa's real, they find out he's not, and then they'll get to their 15, 16-year-old, get to be 15 or 16-year-old and basically say, okay, so is God not real either? I understand that there are kids who have asked that question. My take on that has always been, if your kid learns to equate Santa Claus with God, or if your kid's faith is going to be dependent on whether or not they did or didn't believe in Santa Claus, like you've kind of got some bigger fish to fry there. Like I don't think that's a fair thing to say. But I guess what I would ask, I was being a little bit tongue-in-cheek with the get a grip thing, but like, I do think there's an element of like, there are make-believe things that we let kids believe. There are make-believe things that kids just kind of naturally, play. And Matt Walsh had a great tweet about it, a tweet that at least I thought was pretty great. He said, young children think Batman is real. They think fairies and mermaids are real. I let my children believe all that stuff too. If my daughter tells me she saw a fairy in the garden, I don't say, no, you didn't. Fairies are fake. No, he says, I play along and say, you did? Awesome. Where was it? He says the same kind of thing we do with Santa. And I had that kind of thought as well of like, do these people who say it's wrong to teach your kids about Santa, every time the kid points, says something about a unicorn, or to Matt Walsh's point about a fairy, like, now that's not real, right? That's not real. Again, kind of the person who, watches a fictional movie and spends the whole time telling you, now this isn't real, right? This is fake, right? Like, nobody wants to be around that kind of person. And so, I get what they're saying, and I probably shouldn't have been so dismissive of it, but I do feel like there's an element of, I don't know, fantasy, like we need to be able to let our imagination run. And so I don't know. I'm kind of throwing a lot of thoughts out there, but I don't see it near as harmful as so many people do. I grew up believing in Santa Claus. Never once did I question God when I found out Santa wasn't real. Never once did I blame my parents for lying to me. Like to me, you engage in that with your children because there is some magic associated with it. There is, again, kids believe Mickey Mouse is real, for goodness sakes. How many parents are telling them, hey, Mickey Mouse isn't real? So yeah, that was ramble. Joe, what do you think?
I don't know. I had a Psychology Today article pulled up. The guy seems very very anti-Santa or lying to your kids, and it just seems such a harsh word. And I know technically, I suppose it is. I would say it's almost righteous deception in a way, as weird as that sounds, where you are allowing your kids to indulge and engage in something that is magical, something that is, it's a lot of fun, and it's a way to give to your kids in a way that it like you don't have to have the kid thank Santa or thank you. It's like they just get to enjoy the gift and be doted on, where it's, I don't know, there's something cool about that, where my kids don't have to turn around, thanks mom and dad. Like, they're very grateful kids, and they'll do that on the gifts that we give them. But just this idea that somebody's out there watching them, watching out for them and taking care of them type of thing. Like, there's a warm and fuzzy element to it that, okay, sue me, well, you're lying to your kid. Like, no, there's a level of allowing my kid to believe something that is inaccurate, because sure, it is playing into the fun, it's playing into the lighter side of life, and allowing them to enjoy the unicorns, the fairies, Batman, and Santa Claus, and the Tooth Fairy, and the Easter Bunny, and things like that. I don't have a problem with those things for those kids that are scarred psychologically. Yeah, that was kind of a millennial thing of like, I can't believe my parents lied to me.
I was going to ask that. Like,
it's such a lame millennial take.
What does it say about you that you were traumatized? And I'm not trying to be harsh, but like, what does it say about you that you were traumatized when you found out Santa Claus didn't exist? Like,
there was a time when imagination, I think, first off, was way more present than it is now. The other thing is, there was a time when, like, I think kids needed to believe in something greater, needed to, and yes, God too, but like, needed to believe that there's hope and there's joy and there, somebody out there is taking care of them type of thing. Like, and then the cynicism sets in, and I think Gen X was very cynical, and I think the millennials kind of carried that cynicism of, we don't need that, I want you to tell me the truth, and authenticity becomes big and everything else. And it's like, yeah, but there's a level of letting kids be kids. And so, Jack, I am curious, you're the I'm a millennial too, technically, but just on the back end, you're a little more in that, and you are the one that my kids firmly believe in Santa, and I'll tell them eventually, of course, but you're not quite on the firmly to the other side for sure. But where do you fall on some of these things?
There really is that irony with millennials, that like earnestness is looked as a bad thing, as a weakness, as a, oh wow, look, get a load of this guy kind of thing. And even down to with children, I think there's kind of like a revisionist history of like, oh wow, you idiot, you actually believed in that kind of thing. Like, yeah, because you're 5 years old, like.
It's harmless, yeah.
Right. Well, and just again, innocence and earnestness. I mean, these are the same people that are playing with the toys that are meant for 5-year-olds, right? I mean, like and so they don't have a sense of what a 5-year-old is, especially when you don't have kids or whatever. And when you have kids, you see the wonder and all that. And so I think that's one of these. This is very hard to have this discussion legitimately, because we are so saturated in cultural influences we don't even understand. Because I was trying to look up, like, how long has this been going on? And best I could tell, it's been for at least a few hundred years, that, like, or a couple hundred years, that people have played it, oh, Santa's coming, and I mean, like that. So this has gone on for a long time, and nobody thought, oh, wow, we're lying to her. And these are not impious people. These are not people who aren't, or like,
right,
don't care about what God says. They just didn't think about it in these ways that we do. And it might be that we just take ourselves a little bit too seriously. I don't know. Now, about the thing that kids pretend, I do see a difference in parents telling the kid and parents letting the kid indulge their own thing. Like my little Gloria used to tell me, Daddy, there's a rhino in my bedroom. And I'd go, help her get the rhino out of her bedroom. There's no rhino. It's just, imagination. I didn't tell her, hey, there's a rhino in your bedroom, and really ham it up and really try and get her to believe it and keep telling her that. And so I can see a difference there, but still
But you played along with the idea that there was a rhino in there. I think just like a lot of parents play along with the idea of Santa Claus. Yes.
But I'm saying there's a difference between planting the idea and a child's imagination. A child's imagination didn't come up with Santa. Like adults said, hey, here's this guy that's going to come into our house and you need to be good or he's going to give you a bad present and, things like that. And so I do see a difference there, but I don't know how to evaluate this. Again, like, I don't know how to separate it from everything that we find ourselves in. And you never can separate it, but I'm saying if you look back, yeah, and they were in their own culture, but for those couple hundred years that nobody was really asking this question, I guess my way of putting it is this way. Anything that in the last 10 years we figured it out and everybody before us was stupid.
That's a good take,
I always hit the pause button for a second and take a look around.
Well, and it's really tough to be lectured by the group that put Ronald McDonald to death. That every amount of whimsy, and I know we've talked about this before, but every amount of whimsy that we have in this culture, every bit of fun that was just for kids, every kid-only space is gone. And you're going to lecture me on how to take care of my kids and on lying to your kids. It's because you can't treat kids as kids. You want to treat them as adults. And kids that are parentified want to be treated as though they're parents and as though they are adults. How dare they lie to me? It's like, no, you don't get to lecture me at all on kids because, A, you're the generation that gave up on kids. You don't have kids. Or if you do, they're out of wedlock and it's a disaster. And I'm sorry, I'm broad brushing here, but
bear
just
with
like
me. The parenting styles, like treating your 3-year-old like a CEO.
Correct. The gentle parenting and then getting rid of every kid-only space, all the kid fun stuff, and then commandeering all of that and making a bazillionth Marvel movie because you can't grow up yourself. Don't lecture me on me having my kid believe in Santa. I'm sorry. It rings as pretty ridiculous coming from him.
Did you say Ronald McDonald died?
I'm just saying they put Ronald McDonald to death basically. Like
I didn't even know he was sick.
Metaphorically.
Well, that's why he has the hospital.
Okay.
Sorry.
Never mind.
Sorry. Anyway, that's terrible. But no, the idea of like the fun of kids, and they're bringing it back, kind of whatever. But yeah,
right,
it's that's the point that I would get, and I agree with you that this is kind of a relatively new thing to question the idea of Santa planting it. People can go a little far, but.
I hadn't thought of that before, that it is kind of a new thing that people are starting to, and like you said, Jack, people are emphatic about it. Like there are typically there are not very many people who are like, I don't really think you should, but I don't really care. No, people, if they lean that way, they're typically like, you're basically a bold-faced liar is kind of the way that they describe it.
Right. And somebody's going to come in and be like, well, my parents didn't do it back in 1970. Broadly speaking, this was not a huge cultural conversation. Yeah, there's always going to be the exception. Yeah, I mean, there's people around the world that haven't ever played Santa Claus. Like, we can always find somebody, but these articles, calling it like a lie and deceiving your children and unchristian and all that, like that is very new, I feel.
Well, because you hear parents, or you'll hear people too that say, well, I want my kids to know, that I'm the one that got them the presents, and they're not some random guy. It's like,
don't want Santa getting my credit, yeah.
Exactly. It's like, okay, I know that's probably tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, like, I'm sorry, I would rather my 5-year-old have a little bit of whimsy. I like that word. Like, a little bit of, it's really dumb, but we have an elf on the shelf here at our house, and man, my kids love coming down the stairs and trying to find where the elf is, right? And what am I going to say? Well, I actually moved the elf last night. I'm the one that put it here. Like, no, of course I'm not going to do that, right? But it's a very, very interesting discussion, I will say.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really come down on it anywhere, but I don't think you have to. But it's very hard to. I don't know. The dogmaticness of it is very interesting to me. I'm not there on that. I guess I'll say that much.
I get the lies. I get where they're coming from and saying you're lying to your kid. I just think, from a psychological standpoint, allowing your kids the joy of believing in something that is like, I don't know. It's just and yeah, I guess you could say that's with God, but I think it's really healthy to foster a child's imagination as much as possible and let them grow with it, and they will soon meet the realities of life of, hey, guess what, those things cost money, and hey, guess what, there's no Santa Claus. There's time and place for that, but I'm a big believer in letting kids be kids as long as they can, because adulthood hits you, man, upside the head, and the sooner it hits you, usually the worse adjusted you are as an individual. If you have to grow up at 7 years old and realize that the world is a lot harder than you thought it was, no 7-year-old or 8-year-old or 9-year-old really needs to be dealing with that. They're kids. Let them be kids. And Santa is a big part of kids' imagination. It just represents childhood to me in so many ways, of the joys and wonders of what life could be. that will come crashing down. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but look, man, you pay taxes and you start to realize,
Mr. Cynical has entered.
yeah, especially self-employment tax, and you go, wow, life hit hard. You know what? Let them be kids. So that's my take.
You're of the mindset you can never do too much to make a child's Christmas magical. So anyway, all right, we're going to get out of here for that one. Appreciate everyone that has listened this far into the full episode. As always, think fast. If you're catching this, we did a full episode on what is the church. So keep an eye out for that on Monday. And yeah, I think we're going to wrap right there, and we'll talk to you on the next one. Hey guys, Jack Wilkie here. If you enjoy our work with podcasts like Think Deeper and Godly Young Men and our books, articles, seminars, and want to support the work that we do, the best way to do so is to go to focuspress.org/donate. That's focuspress.org/donate.